All right. Well, good afternoon and welcome to our trauma and implicit bias session. My name is Tiffany Young. I am the Director of Equity and Diversity for Washoe County School District. Joining us today are the entire Equity and Diversity team. We have Manny Ortiz, who is an Equity and Diversity Specialist, Tony Montgomery, Equity and Diversity Specialist, Cassandra Lopez, Equity and Diversity Specialist, and then Pam Janelle, Equity and Diversity Specialist. So we would like to say thank you for joining us for today, and we're looking forward to our session. We do want to open up the session and just acknowledge the fact that we know for yesterday, it was really heavy for a lot of people. And as we think about what happened in the verdict and the conversation around the George Floyd murder that took place, there was a lot of feelings on both sides of that situation. But we do want to let you know that as we think about this work and this conversation, the world has been watching what's been happening closely. And many of us have very strong opinions regarding the trial, the verdict, and what it means for social justice and communities in relationship to law enforcement. So given the nature of this conference, it is essential for us to truly recognize these events in real time. We do understand that these events may have impacted our students, families, our colleagues on various levels, ourselves, and we encourage each and every one of us to take a moment to recognize how our words and our actions may affect others. And if you need support, please feel free to reach out to us or help us, or we can help you find additional resources. So we just again would like to say thank you for being here today, and we're looking forward to our session. As we said, you are in your trauma and implicit bias session for today with our Equity and Diversity Department. As we look at this work, we really want to talk about why are we here? So on your screen, you see that our goal for today is really to explore the connections of implicit bias as well as the potential manifestation that comes with connections to trauma. We want to lean into connections around prejudice, bias, microaggressions. We also want to look at how we can recognize how implicit bias can play into the potential manifestation of trauma and how individuals respond. Today, we're hoping that participants will learn to become self-aware of your own biases and microaggressions, as well as how to avoid them impacting your classroom, your school's culture, and your school's climate. So we are looking forward to a wonderful session for today, and we're excited about the work and the conversation that will take place. So as we lean into this work, one of the things that you all know that if you've been in a training with equity and diversity is that we don't take a lot of time to dig deep into the conversation. So we're going to open it up with our icebreaker for today. So on your screen, you see 4 photos of young people. What we'd like you to do is if you could get a scratch piece of paper, maybe draw 4 boxes or 4 columns or 4 rows, whichever one is easiest for you, and number them 1, 2, 3, and 4. On your paper, what we'd like you to do is take your time and think about what is the very first impression you see when you look at the photos of the students on your screen. What is the first thing that pops into your head? What are thoughts about whether or not this young person was a student in your school? What are your first impressions about the faces that you see? As you jot down your notes, I'm going to put us into breakout rooms, and myself as well as my team are going to lead us into some discussion. In our breakout rooms, you're going to have the opportunity to explore several questions, and our team will lead you through that dialogue. But I want you to take a few minutes and jot down your notes. Put a descriptor down that will help you understand who you're writing about, but number it 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now, as we lean into this breakout conversation, this will set the tone for us to authentically start to engage in the conversation that we need to have. This will set the foundation for us to be able to have authentic conversation and really truly move us into a space where we can talk about the shifts and changes that connect us to authentic conversation around implicit bias, equity, diversity, cultural competency, and trauma. So in your breakout rooms, you're going to get about 12 minutes to have some conversation. We want you to honor and respect the voices in the room and share the space. And we're going to go ahead and move you now into your breakout session. Well, thank you all for taking the time to be in your breakout rooms. I hope that you had really good discussion. I hope that you were able to really, truly dig deep and address some of the things that we are seeing and hearing when it comes to the lived experiences of our students. Some of the things that we hope that you had a chance to talk about include some areas around what you can learn or not learn from a portrait or a person, even if you're looking at an infinite campus file or a piece of data or information. Some of that could also include whether or not you can tell what's important to a person's identity, what limits or impacts your understanding of who our young people are. How does your understanding of a person affect their their pose, their facial expression, their posture when they're sitting in a classroom or in a school building? How did the personal statements affect how you understand a person or a photograph? And then what factors lead your discussion? What we know is that trauma looks different on everyone, whether they're of a different race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, or socioeconomic status, or any varying label of their identity. Trauma is going to show up differently. And so when the keynote shared yesterday, when a young person is sitting in our class and sometimes their behavior may land on us, then we may think it's about us. And sometimes it has nothing to do with us in the classroom. It is something that they are living through, working with, and trying to process. So I want to say thank you to my group for joining in, but I do want to give us a moment to have some conversation. So if there are a couple of you that would like to share out, maybe your reflection from that activity, was there an aha moment for you? Did it help you connect a little deeper and even help you unpack first impressions that we have of young people? So we'll take one or two, or you can just put some comments in the chat.
One thing that I learned with Cassandra in our group was when someone is so concerned about how they're being perceived by others, then they're less likely to make connections or want to listen to you because they're too worried about what others are thinking of them.
Yes. And there's power in that, right? We know that the amount of work and responsibility that you all have had to carry over this last year is unimaginable. And the fact that you continue to show up, right, is applaudable. But we also know that our students and our families are still trying to survive, striving to show up, striving to be present. And if they are worried about all of these other external factors, it may be extremely challenging to be in that place of that classroom level of engagement that we're expecting. So this icebreaker gives us an opportunity to unpack some of that. We know that with many of our students, they may be showing up in these different spaces. They may just be processing when they're sitting in the classroom. Some may be, in fact, bored. Others may be seriously thinking about what's happening, while others are just deeply concerned, maybe about the lesson, the curriculum, or just what happened that morning or what's going to happen when they get home. We have others that may be thinking about just whether they're happy or unhappy, they're scared. Some are just relaxed. There's some rebellion in there. All of these things may be circling in the mind of our young people. So when we talk about implicit bias and trauma, we have to be mindful about the assumptions that we make, the first reaction that we make to people, what we think we know about young people when it lands in a classroom environment. So when we talk about the culture and climate of schools, we have to think about this. These are statements that we make often. We say things like, well, we don't know what we don't know. And I will say, yes, that is true. However, we cannot allow this statement to be a crutch or an excuse for growth. So when we're talking about how do we flow through a space of understanding, when we think about terms of trauma and implicit bias, we can start in this, I don't know, I don't know. So we may make a quick reaction or response to a student or a family or a situation, and we may be acting out of lack of knowledge. It may have been the heat of the moment. We have an assumption, we make a reaction, or we make a comment. That's that I don't know phase. But as we move through to saying, I don't know, but I think I do, that's when the awakening happens. This awakening of our consciousness by acquiring information. So then we're going to figure out what is going on with our young people. We have this dialogue often about relationships. And what I will say is we have relationships in our schools. We probably need to step back and reevaluate what those relationships are. And so when we're in this space of this awakening our consciousness by acquiring information, challenging our assumptions. So when our first thought is this young person is lazy, maybe we need to step back and find out what's going on with that young person in that time and in that moment. And so as we move from this, I don't know, but I think I do, there's some more growth that happens. I can say, I don't know. I don't know, right? And that's when I've engaged in the expansion of my knowledge and understanding. That's when I have stepped outside of my assumption. That's when I've stepped outside of believing something negative, and I've gained some understanding of who they are. And now I can start to shift my thinking. But that requires the will. And we think about this skill, will, and ability for things to change, for shift to happen. And we say shift happens in our department all the time. SHIF is in fabulous T, shift happens. And we want to shift the environment and the culture and climate for growth. So when we have the will to move through this, that's when we can say, I know what's happening with this young person, with this family, with my colleagues. And only at that point do we begin to exist in some full consciousness, and we can become secure in our belief that our fund of knowledge now is sufficient. So we are not making snap decisions. We are not leaning on assumptions to drive our response. We are not just believing what we read in a folder without engaging in authentic relationship. That is where we can have opportunity for growth. But when we talk about things around implicit bias and how trauma connects, we have to understand that there are incidents that occur for young people that lead to layers of trauma. And they come in the connection to this conversation of implicit bias through the realm of microaggressions. Now, many of you may say, I hate bugs, and why are there bugs on the screen? But the microaggression conversation, we liken it to a mosquito bite. So who's ever been bitten by a mosquito, right? All of us, maybe somewhere. The first time you got bitten, it itched a little bit, didn't bother you so much. But imagine when you got bit the first time, and then the second time, and then the third time, and then it's happened over and over and over. Kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third, it just keeps going. So these microaggressions, these brief, everyday kind of verbal, behavioral, and environmental exchanges, they're both unintentional and intentional, but they send a disparaging message to individuals based on their group. Race, gender, sexual orientation, social economic status, varying level of ability, language, all of these things. And so statements or the classroom or the community or the family every day. So remember, mosquito bite 1, 2, 3, 4, day in, day out, kindergarten through 12th grade. And when our young people are experiencing statements about their language, statements about their culture, statements about their behavior, statements about their ability, these can have serious impacts on them, and they should not be dismissed. So when we make statements like, it wasn't that bad, I'm sure that's not what they meant, you shouldn't be so sensitive, why are you getting so upset? We have to understand that these things can have processes that lead to depression. They can lead to anxiety-related symptoms. They can also lead to diminished psychological well-being and physical health. So imagine a young person carrying this day in and day out with an expectation to engage, with an expectation to have some conversation. So we're going to watch a little video, and we're going to listen to some young people, and we're going to think about this. As you all watch this video, as you listen to what's happening, I want you to think about, what are you hearing from these young people? What do you see happening? Look at their body language and their posture. How would you respond if this was a group of young people in your school or in your class? And think about these connections to both implicit bias and microaggressions. So take a few moments, watch our video, jot down a few notes as you go ahead and listen through.
There's things in my school where there will be 3 black kids in a class, and after the first little quarter, you'll get your work done, you'll have pretty good grades, but the teacher will be like, she'll pull those 3 black kids aside, be like, you guys need to separate from each other, you're distracting the class. There might be 3 white girls in the back laughing the entire class, and the only thing she'll say is be quiet. Being black comes with the stereotypes of being loud, disruptive, and always angry when you don't get your way. I just think I just wanted to be heard, I should say. Especially being one of the few black kids in your class, just being heard is one of the big things for me. So I don't think teachers try to do it, but they do.
I'm the one that gets sent out the classroom. All the kids look at me like, oh, he got issues, you know, he gotta leave the class every once every 3 periods because, you know, but that's just, you know, it's also my fault because, you know, that's who I choose to sit next to, you know.
I remember back in first grade, this situation really got on my nerves. So I forgot why, but for some reason, a girl was crying, a white girl, she was crying, and the teacher called me over. And the girl told her that I made her cry, I pushed her down. I was like, I didn't, because I actually hadn't. And I kept on saying I hadn't, it wasn't me. And I guess the girl didn't know exactly who it was, or she thought it was me. But then the teacher took her word for it. And I got sent to the office. And that was one of the things at such a young age where I was just like, wow, why exactly?
So like if I tell my parents like there's something going on at school to the teacher, and like my mom, she was like, you want me to go over there? I'm like, no, I don't. Because like it's gonna have a bad effect on the looks of me and her. Because like she's gonna go over there like the angry, mad black woman, and then the teacher is gonna get a stereotype of her, and then she'll be like, oh, that's why he's doing bad at school, or that's why that. And so I try to like fix it on my own to like get back at the teacher and to let them know like I'm not what they think I am.
One of the things that bothered me was my teachers would grade me differently based on this is at first, they would maybe grade me a little bit easier based on the color of my skin than they did my white counterparts. Yeah. And I felt like as teachers, they had internalized the belief that because I'm black, my expectations of the type of work that I could do was less than maybe some other students. So when I walked in the room, they automatically thought that the work that I was gonna do maybe wouldn't have been as articulate or as progressed as some of the other kids, just based off of the way I look. And that's how are black kids coming in after me supposed to feel if their history, English, math, science teachers, when they first walk in, believe that they're not as smart as other kids.
I know I'm smarter than the teacher thinks, so if I'm gonna take, you know, what they give me, and I'm gonna take advantage of it and turn it around into that A or that B plus that the teacher didn't think I could get. Or if they give me this extra help that I know I don't need, you say, okay, thank you, but you finish it before everybody else does, and it just slaps the teacher in the face.
No matter how many Louis Armstrongs there are, no matter how many James Baldwins there are, we're always going to be looked at different, you know, always, just because of our skin color. I mean, you know, we are in shackles, but they're just gold-plated, so it looks like, you know, we are okay. But at the end of the day, like, we're always going to be shackled up into that category, you know. That's just how it is.
I feel like they like take black people and then they're like, here you go, put you in this box. This is how you're supposed to act. You can't come outside of this because you can't act this way. This area right here, this is white, so you have to stay inside the black box. Like I hear a lot, like if there's like a black person being really articulate, knowing what they're talking about, oh, why are you talking white? Like what exactly is talking to white? Like so being articulate and intelligent, that's talking white, that's acting white.
Yeah, you hear the term, oh, why are you trying to act so black?
Right.
Yeah. Like that's less than.
Right.
Yeah. Just call them straight up weak.
Yeah.
You can't play this sport. They can be the best person on the team, but they're weak because they don't look like everybody else.
Well, when I'm with black people, I'm acting white. And when I'm with white people, I'm acting black. And I feel like I don't really have a place. Like, where do I fit in? Where am I just myself? Where am I just me?
And some black people say, you don't act your color. Like, I need you to act so-called white right now. It makes me feel like for some reason among the whole world, my color is put down to just put down another level. It doesn't make me feel good inside. It makes me feel a little angry with myself because I feel like I'm supposed to do something to try to change it, but I don't know where to start.
It's a lot of division in between the black races.
Yeah.
Why can't we just embrace our own culture? Why can't we be united? But no, I'm light skin. Oh, I'm dark skin. Oh, light skins act like that. Oh, dark skins act like that. But it's not just we're black. We're brothers.
Yeah.
I wish we could do things like paint, do swimming, do golf, do filmmaking, do acting, do all these things, and not be looked at as being more white. Like, I don't think football, basketball should be they shouldn't be the limits of self-expression for us as a whole. We should be able to feel like we can do more without being judged and being put in boxes because we only do these certain things. I feel like there's a lot of problems such as lack of resources and support, like more institutional problems that persist that go deeper, that might not allow black men to get to the same point as white males. And I think this applies for a lot of black males. If your only form of self-expression at the end of the day is like to go on a basketball court or to go on a football field, that affects your ability to do homework after school. So if that's the only other thing you can do to express yourself besides just going to classes, then like how is that helping you? Like,
I feel like there's a lot of stuff, not exactly like this, but like a lot of black people, like we can go to our friends and we talk about stuff like this, but then again, like what do we do about it? Right. Are we like, and where do we start to do something about it? Mm-hmm. Like we can talk about, oh, it's this and this is how it is and it's because of this and that, but then again, what are we doing? What steps are we taking to make that progress to, like, as we, whole purpose, how are we gonna close that achievement gap?
So I'd like to hear from you all, thoughts or comments on what you heard, what you saw in the video. You can either use the chat or you can unmute yourself and share your thoughts there as well. So what did you hear? What did you see? How would you respond? What connections did you see to implicit bias and microaggressions for the young students? Again, feel free to use the chat, or you can unmute yourself and you can share your thoughts with the group.
I'll jump in. I find it very sad that they feel like their teachers don't believe in them. And it's simply because, and even the young man who said that he knew his teacher was grading him easy just because he was Black, I find that very sad that happens.
Mm-hmm. And part of that we have to think about, that is the perception and experience that this young man was feeling. We also have to understand that implicit bias shows up and causes trauma in different ways and forms in an educational system. And if we don't know who our students are, we won't know that this is what they're feeling and what they're experiencing. And think back to that microaggression. That first mosquito bite, that second mosquito bite. There was a young man that talked about an incident in the first grade that he's still holding and carrying. And so these things aren't things that just go away because of a new grade or a new teacher. They're things that carry on grade after grade after grade for many students. And not just about being a Black student. You could be a student, an Indigenous student. You can be a student that has a gay, lesbian, transgender student. You could be a student that has a low socioeconomic background. Any of these markers that have triggered a young person, they don't just go away. Other thoughts or comments, and feel free, as I said, to use the chat if you like. So I see, sounds exhausting to have to deal with so much. I wonder if these kids, what I see, I wonder if the kids have to feel the same way if their teachers were of all of color. And that's a great point that Cindy put in there. One of the things we say in our training is that one thing we have to remember is that you don't get a bonus because you are a person of color to connect with a person of color. However, if you are not and you have a limited cultural global worldview, it's going to be a challenge. But vice versa, if a majority of our teachers were teachers of color and they had a limited cultural global worldview, it would be challenging to teach our diverse students as well. So those are things we really, really want to think about. I see it breaks my heart. Our Black men and women have to shoulder this burden that so many white people don't see their own bias or microaggression or even be open to seeing them. And these are difficult conversations. And so imagine when we as educators are struggling to engage in the dialogue, our young people are struggling to live through the dialogue on a daily basis. So these are opportunities where we really, really want to shift and grow. So what these students talked about is maybe 1 or 2 incidents that had happened to them, and then the teachers maybe even carried it over. And that goes into this conversation around negativity bias. And so one of the things we had in our handouts for you all was for you to take a look at an excerpt from the reading. And so I'm going to also put that in the chat for you. You do not have to read it at this time, but it's definitely something for you to reflect on. This negativity bias, and the keynote speaker spoke about it as well in her book, it really shows up when we're more powerfully affected by negative experiences than the positive ones. So a student makes an error, and then that error stays with them for the entire year of school, or that error comes and it keeps resurfacing. Sometimes we as educators may hold on to that error with a particular family or a colleague, and we may hold that error over their head, and that bias just continues to resurface. That negativity bias can extend to identity markers around age or race or gender. We may have a bad experience with a person from a different sexual orientation, and then we not connect that on and it stays with them. So that negativity bias can be something that causes deficiency, low expectations, and inability for young people, families, or even colleagues to be successful. So when we think about negativity bias, what we really want to think about is these feelings over facts, right? So the keynote talked about sometimes when we feel offended as an educator in that space, or if something has happened to us, and then our feelings override the fact of the situation. So in the feelings over fact conversation, we know there's in-group bias, even the young person talked about it, but the negativity bias happens when our truth and our belief and our knowledge end up converging. So our hope is that we think about the truth that we hold, our core values and belief, but we do the work to obtain the knowledge. Remember that flow chart that we talked about. So in that negativity bias, that beliefs are factual. So we may hold so foundationally to something we believe in about a young person's behavior, a young person's language, a young person's ability or culture, and then we hold that to not disrupt anything and not allow the true facts to come in. In the negativity bias, we may have these perceptions, are not always accurate. Think about our icebreaker. We looked at the pictures of our students, we thought some things, and then we read their statements. So the perception, sometimes we may have to do the work to interrupt. We also have to know that in negativity bias, our brains absorb so much information, and the emotional and primitive parts, they kind of preempt the thinking parts. So you got into a bad situation, argument, or you just had a student disrupted class on Monday. You wake up on Tuesday already ready to deal with that student based on the behavior on Monday. And so instead of trying to figure out maybe what was going on for you, as well as what was happening for that student, it carries over. So in those situations, we turn our beliefs about what happened into the fact about who that young person is, or the fact about who that family is, or the fact about who that colleague is. We have to remember that in the absence of information, our brains start to fill in the blanks. So what do we believe about lazy? And what do we believe about successful? And what do we believe about engaged? And what do we believe about respectful? All of these things show up, and our biases drive a lot of this. We draw on how we feel about a situation. And then when we operate as if that feeling is the entire fact of what's happened. So in order for us to unpack this work around negativity bias, we have to examine whether or not we're going to fall into any of these bias traps. So when we're in this space of feeling over facts, and specifically around this negativity bias, where it can lead to expanding or deepening the biases that we may hold that cause more trauma for a young person, we have to think about negativity biases are more affected by negative instead of positive experiences. And sometimes the negative is easy, right? We could just name it. We can run the list. We have to search often for the positive. So these show up when we're overwhelmed. You all have done a tremendous amount of work this school year. Families have done a tremendous amount of work during this school year. And everyone in some way, shape, or form is overwhelmed. And when you're overwhelmed, the negative can just show up. we also have to remember is that we then rely on this pull of our emotions over what we know to be fact. And so when we don't get beyond any expectation or a stereotype or a biased way of thinking, we're still functioning in our emotions and we have not checked understanding for the fact. And also in that space of feelings over facts, we succumb to this impulse of shortcuts in order to quickly act. We know that oftentimes you all don't have a lot of time. When we think about what happens in our quick response verbally, our quick response physically, our quick response because the schedule won't allow for room, we then fall into some of these negativity bias traps. So we have to do the work to recognize how these traps may show up for us. So as you look at this, you probably say, well, how do I do this work? Well, the first is build your own awareness of the bias. So if you know you have a bias around a certain behavior, then you need to do the work to figure out what is triggering that for you. If you've been known to have a bias about a certain child, if a colleague has even brought this to your attention, do the work to kind of build some awareness. Where did it come from? Why is it that you respond the way you do? What is it about this particular family, colleague, or student that causes you to respond the way you do? And then create some space for you to hijack those instincts. So if your automatic instinct is to send that kid out of class or shut that kid down or not talk to that family member or not give someone eye contact or a level of engagement, we need to do the work to hijack those instincts because we're still living in feelings and we haven't done the work to unpack the facts. And then the third is take control of your decision-making process, right? We are all in a space where we can do our best to try to manage the way we can for successful outcomes, because oftentimes our quick responses interrupt opportunities for healthy relationships for our young people to be successful. So as we think about the strategies, we really want to do this work to kind of unpack this. So I want to give us some time to work on this. I know that's a lot of information, but we're going to practice. So I'm going to put us in new breakout rooms and we're going to work on this practice piece. We're going to think about what we can try now, listing how, when, where, when, what triggers the bias trap for you. This is where you can reflect on those barriers, this unwillingness to adapt, this unawareness to change, this, being indifferent to understanding systems of oppression and privilege and entitlement. You can think about those barriers to cultural competency to help you work through that list. You can think about this try tomorrow and use the cultural proficiency lens, thinking about, have I done things or have I had culturally destructive patterns of practices that may have traumatized kids on the farthest left? And then how can I examine whether or not I shift to culturally proficient practices that move and heal through the trauma? So we can lay out an action plan. We don't expect you to have this all figured out in the next day or two. It will take work. It's a process. And then the last will be for you to take control. Use that equity lens. What marginalized groups are affected or impacted by the decision? Who are the stakeholders? How do I mitigate some of the barriers? Evaluate this decision-making process. Evaluate the cost, the barriers, or even the benefits to the bias of your action. So you won't be able to do the entire process right now, but what I want you to do is really, really think through how you can maybe work on one thing, one list that you want to focus on for right now to help you kind of build and grow into a space where you know you can start to unpack and understand what's happening. Again, it is not going to be solved overnight. It is not the expectation that you have all of your answers right now, but we do want you to think about, how can I start to take the steps necessary? How can I start to unpack some of this so that I can intentionally lean into this work? So in our breakout rooms, staff will help guide you through some discussion. And again, we are not expecting you to have all of the answers and finish it all right now. We just want you to maybe pick one to focus on. In your breakout rooms, we're going to give you about 10 minutes to have some conversation. So it's not designed for you to solve it all, but we do want you to start thinking about where you can begin. We'll go ahead and move you now into your breakout rooms. All right, thank you all very much for engaging in your breakout time. I know many of you are probably thinking it just was not enough time. So what I will tell you is that you can, if you have not taken an Equity 101 course from us, please do, as well as reaching out and joining us in our upcoming book studies that we have in MyPGS. So I want to say thank you to my group for engaging in that dialogue. We also want to remind you that this work is journey work. So if you're sitting in a space and you're saying, you know, I got to do all this by June, that's not what we're saying. We want you to remember that it's a process. So there's no expectation that you have all of this work figured out around implicit bias and trauma and how they connect. We don't need emails next week and say, I was culturally competent and I looked at my biases all week long. We want you to take this on as a journey in your professional practice. We also want to remember the fact that we have an institutional obligation, right, to educate our students. So when we sit in this space and we hear terms like implicit bias and trauma, and we start talking about identity markers, sometimes, as I share with my group, we have this proverbial clutching of our pearls, like, I'm a good person, this does not apply to me. Well, if you have a pulse, you have a bias. And so what we have to remember is that if we don't do the work to figure out the how, the where, the when, the what trigger it is, we're not authentically engaging. So I do want to give you a couple of opportunities. If a few people would like to stand up and share or unmute and share your thoughts or your comments around the let's practice. What was your takeaway? What was something that kind of really clarified information or hit home with you in your breakout group from your let's practice session? All right. So what we're going to do now is we're going to do one last breakout, and this is speed round breakout. What I want you to do is share in your small group what your takeaway is from today. What is your one takeaway that connects to the conversation around implicit bias and trauma? So I want you all to think about, what is my one action? What's the one action step that I'm going to focus on after I leave this session for today? All right. So I'm going to give you all a few minutes to think about it, a couple of minutes. And as you think about it in your breakout rooms, I'd like you to share with your group, what is the one thing that you plan to take away from today? All right. So we're going to have about 5 minutes. So it's going to be quick, like rapid fire, to share your information. And I'm going to move you now into your breakout room. Thank you all very much for engaging in your breakout time. We were able to really start to think about some things, and I heard from our group the one takeaway. We do want to remind you that we are a resource, and we are here to support your schools and your classrooms, and know that you can reach out to us for any time. We are always a respecter of time. So we want to make sure that we respect your time and end properly. But before we do that, I just want to say thank you on behalf of the Equity and Diversity Department, on behalf of my team. So if you see on the screen, if you're a school that's in Area 1, Manny Ortiz is going to be your equity and diversity specialist. So he supports all of the principals and schools in Area 1. If you are a school in Area 2, Cassandra Lopez will be your support for resources in Area 2 if you ever need to reach out. If you are in Area 3, I will be the supports that support all the schools in Area 3. If you're a school in Area 4, Tony Montgomery will be your support for Area 4. And then if you are any of our schools in Area 5, Dr. Pamela Junell will be your support in Area 5. And so we hope today that we were able to plant some seeds for you. We hope that you have some takeaways and some information that you can actually apply. Try today, try tomorrow, but remember that it is a journey. So there's no expectation that you have it all figured out by next week, but we want you to commit to authentically and even vulnerably lean in so that we can create the outcomes that we need for all of our students, and making sure that we understand the connection between any of our implicit biases, microaggressions, and the trauma that our students or our families or our staff may be experiencing. So we appreciate you again. You get 2 minutes of your life back because it is 4:58, and we thank you all for being here, and we hope that you have an absolutely wonderful day. Thank you so much on behalf of the Equity and Diversity Department. We'll see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.